We do begin this morning with the latest from Buffalo, where they are finally getting a break from all that snow as warmer temperatures set in. But that now brings a whole new concern, the potential for flooding. The city has been able to dig out enough so that authorities were able to lift the travel ban there this morning, allowing people to venture back out and restock on critical items like food and medication. But Buffalo's mayor is still urging people to stay off the roads this morning if they possibly can so that recovery efforts can continue.
I'm asking people to still be cautious, and if you don't need to drive, please don't. A travel advisory will be in place as the storm cleanup continues, and lots of equipment will be on city streets hauling and removing snow.
Well, the warmer weather in the area may also allow crews to complete more search and rescue missions today. Right now, more than 30 people are confirmed dead as a result of that storm in the Buffalo area, and that number is expected to rise as rescue crews reach cars that are stuck in snowdrifts across the city. Well, the higher temperatures are also causing that threat of flooding we mentioned from the melting snow, which could disrupt the cleanup process. And this morning, as recovery continues from last week's weather, the trouble is ongoing at airports across the country. Delays and cancellations continue to mount, specifically for Southwest Airlines customers, as some flyers are still trying to find their way home even now, days after Christmas. We have full coverage of all this. We'll check in with meteorologist Angie Lassman for the forecast in just a moment. But we're going to start with NBC News correspondent Marissa Parra, who is in Buffalo for us this morning. Marissa, thanks for joining us. So that ban on driving has finally been lifted there in Buffalo. But do we know how that's going to affect the cleanup process? Because more cars on the road could slow the whole thing down, right?
Right. So it's kind of hard to say because it depends, right? So looking into a crystal ball is a little difficult. But what I can say is that as part of the decision-making process, if you will, when they decide to lift the driving ban, part of the decision-making process, they look at the streets that are cleared, and that's one of the reasons why they waited to lift the driving ban as long as they did. And so they needed to clear most of the streets to a good enough point where other cars can drive through while they're obviously still working on clearing roads. I mean, we're standing over here on the sidewalk. You can see on either side of the sidewalk some of that snow that's piled up right on either side of me. And there are some streets that have this on the sidewalks, and maybe they're trying to move it off of the sidewalks now. They're just trying to maybe go through the process of going through some of those back corner streets and side streets that they didn't have a chance to get to. So, I mean, it's not going to make it easier when there's other people on the road, but I don't think that they would have made the decision if they hadn't made enough progress.
Yeah, much needed progress there. And we also know that temperatures will be on the rise there as we head into the weekend. It seems like that could help things, but that also brings us talking about the potential for flooding. What are officials anticipating there?
Yeah, I mean, this is an instance of too much of a good thing too fast. You think on the surface here, rising temperatures with all of this snow is a good thing, right? You have snow in places that you don't want it to be. So when you have those rising temperatures, that causes it to melt. The problem is there was so much snow and these temperatures are rising so fast, especially looking at temperatures upwards of the 50s coming up this weekend, in addition to rain. So when we talk about the strategy of moving the snow around, I want to take you to Lackawanna City Mayor. This is a city further south from Buffalo, also saw a lot of snow. Take a listen to what they're doing as they're trying to move the snow out of the streets and into places that won't cause a problem.
This is what they're pulling off of the streets and trying to get it opened up so that people can start moving around again. We dump it here because there's nothing here, and when it melts, it's not going to damage anything.
So one big concern here is not just the flooding potential in general on the streets, but also the possibility that some of these homes filled with people who've been through so much, lack of food, maybe lack of electricity, might be facing flooded basements on top of everything else. So we know that New York Governor Hochul has deployed state resources and aid, which includes 800,000 sandbags, as well as generators and pumps to try to avoid that from happening.
Such a mess. And Marissa, I did want to ask you quickly here. We know residents have been stuck there in their homes, many of them now needing to get out and get more supplies. How are they doing? How are residents coping?
It's a great question. I mean, I will say that I've had a chance now to speak with residents on the ground, walking around here. I have not personally spoken to people who are still trapped in their homes. We understand that the number of people who are still facing power outages, that number gets less and less and less. At last check, it was around 500, and it's probably gone down since that time was updated. But I think right now there's just sort of shell shock, just seeing the death toll, knowing that that number could very well rise.
So disturbing. Our hearts are definitely with the people of the Buffalo area. Marissa Parra, thanks so much. All right, let's get caught up now on your morning news now weather. Meteorologist Angie Lassman joins us now with a look at how things are shaping up as we do head into the weekend.
Yeah, we're heading into a warm and wet weekend for many across the country. Here's what's going on as far as that warmth. We're going to wrap up the year with temperatures well above normal, 10, 20 degrees higher than they should be for this time of year. Chicago will hit 55 degrees later today, 59 in Lexington, and 71 degrees in Jacksonville. A whole lot different than how we started this work week. As we head into your Friday, temperatures in the high 50s in Washington, D.C., Charlotte at 60 degrees. We look towards the Midwest and St. Louis, not quite as warm as the East, but still 48 degrees and above normal for this time of year. And this trend lasts all the way through the weekend. Your Saturday, your Sunday, and your Monday will be on the warm side of things for this time of year. So relatively speaking, will be much warmer in Cleveland at 50 on Saturday, heading into the new year with 46 degrees on Sunday. So the warmer air is in place. That, of course, is a positive for many folks on the East Coast. But the wetter conditions are going to settle in for many as well. Here's the rainfall forecast expected for folks on the West Coast. From Seattle down to parts of Central and Southern California, we're expecting anywhere from 2 to 3 inches of rain on top of already saturated soils from numerous storm systems that have worked in onshore over the past couple of days and will continue to do so as we head into Saturday, Sunday, to even into Monday of next week. 1 to 3 feet of snow expected in places like the Sierras, so just be careful with that if you're going to be out and about in those areas. We also have another storm system that's going to work across the midsection of the country. That, on the northern side, will bring anywhere from 1 to 4 inches of snow for folks in the northern plains. Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana, though, they'll have the potential to see some severe storms. And then that'll wrap up here as we get into today, the later parts of today. As we head into tomorrow, the rain, unfortunately, Stephen, continues to move off to the east, and we're talking about a soggy Saturday. Folks that are maybe heading to see the ball drop or things like that need to pack their rain gear because we'll have it in place for really after midnight and beyond.
It's honestly kind of miserable in Times Square anyway. Add the rain in. Make sure you get those umbrellas if you're heading out there.
Tell us how you really feel.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's no secret. All right. Thanks so much, Angie. All right. Turning now to the latest on Southwest Airlines and all the travel chaos flyers have been seeing. Many still scrambling to find their way home after thousands of flight cancellations and hundreds of reported delays. NBC News correspondent Blaine Alexander shows us what passengers are dealing with right now and when it could all clear up.
Well, good morning. This has certainly become the familiar and frustrating scene for so many travelers. Today, again, Southwest has canceled about 2,300 flights, just over 2,300 flights. And so certainly that means that people are trying to find different ways to get back home, but also trying to get reunited with their luggage. Now, as this continues, as it has for most of the week, more Southwest executives are speaking out. One, apologizing for this travel backlog that's left many thousands of passengers stranded, but also trying to provide resources, essentially saying that passengers can go online, try and figure out different ways to reunite with their luggage, and also telling them what they are entitled to, not only if they're stranded in a city, but also if they had to come out of pocket for different expenses. We spoke with one woman who says that she and her family had to rent a car and then buy 6 airline tickets in order to get home on a different carrier. All told, those expenses came out to be nearly $3,000, so they're looking for some sort of reimbursement there. Now, remember, the Transportation Department said that they are looking into this, and the Biden administration is putting pressure on Southwest to reimburse these passengers financially for a great deal of inconvenience this week. Back to you.
So much to sort out. Blaine, thank you. All right, turning now to the Vatican, where doctors are closely monitoring the health of 95-year-old Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. Vatican officials say the retired Pope is quite sick at the moment, but his condition remains under control. We have NBC News Vatican analyst Deborah Lubov joining us now, as well as NBC News correspondent Claudio Lavanga, who joins us from Rome. Thank you both so much for being here. Claudio, let's start with you. What's the latest that we know this morning on Benedict, and what's the reaction to all his concerning health news?
Good morning, Stephen. Well, after yesterday's confirmation by the Vatican through a statement that the Pope Benedict XVI's health is deteriorating or has deteriorated in the last few hours due to age, well, they haven't released any update yet. We may get something in an hour or so, but I'll keep you posted. But in the meantime, what we heard that is new is from Italy's main news agency, ANSA, which said that according to sources within the monastery inside the Vatican walls behind me, where Pope Benedict XVI has lived since he retired in 2013, well, he's started having respiratory or breathing problems a few days ago, and that's when he started deteriorating. That the condition overnight has not changed, but it remains serious and stable. As per how the faithful have reacted, well, I can tell you around here, was in St. Peter's Square this morning. It was business as usual with tourists, the faithful, taking pictures, saying prayers, but many didn't seem to be aware that Benedict XVI is very sick, as Pope Francis said yesterday, but I'm sure that many around the world, Catholics I'm talking about, will be following the Pope's suggestion to pray a special prayer for Pope Benedict. Stephen.
All right, Deborah, let's bring you in here. We know Pope Benedict was the first pope in 600 years to retire. So this has all been uncharted territory for almost a decade now, having both a pope and a pope emeritus, as Benedict was called. Are there any protocols or rules that are unique in this unprecedented situation?
I suppose the uniqueness, Stephen, would be, frankly, the fact that there are none. And Pope Francis has had no desire to change that, saying even in a recent interview that he doesn't feel called by the Holy Spirit to implement such rules relating to retired popes for the time being. So while for a reigning pope, when they eventually die or choose to resign, but when they pass away, there is a Vatican document called Universi Dominici Gregis, which completely governs every single step and element of what happens from the moment of death up until the election of the upcoming pope. Whereas in this case, with a retired pope who is no longer pope and no longer head of state, we would expect something important and ceremonial, obviously, most likely presided over by Pope Francis at the funeral mass. But we would have to wait and see what is told by the Holy See Press Office, by the director Matteo Bruni, or what Pope Francis possibly could share himself, or what Pope Benedict, what his wishes are. So it's all kind of a wait and see.
Wait and see for a complicated process. Claudio, do we know how Pope Francis is handling this situation? We know he's had some medical issues of his own. Do we know how his health is now?
Well, that's right, Stephen. Well, you know that Pope Francis has had his share of health problems as well. You may remember a year and a half ago, he underwent colon surgery, from which he seemed to have recovered fine. But recently, in the last few months, his knee problems have worsened to the point that it's made it very difficult for him to walk. Nowadays, he walks with a cane. Many times we've seen him on a wheelchair. So that's the main problem that he's experiencing. But the most surprising thing, perhaps, was to hear from him during an interview to a Spanish newspaper recently that right after he was elected Pope in 2013, he signed a resignation letter that he handed to the Secretary of State here at the Vatican to be used in case in the future his health problems, whatever they could be, made it impossible for him to fulfill his ministry. Stephen?
Quite concerning. And Deborah, just taking a wider view of all this, if you could help us put Pope Benedict's time as Pope in context. A lot of unprecedented things, as we've said. So what kind of legacy did he leave when he did step down?
Well, certainly a legacy that no one was expecting, because this Pope, who had this reputation as someone who was very traditional, a guardian of the faith, conservative values, all of a sudden takes this radical decision after 8 years of leaning the Catholic Church to resign. And some tried to suggest as though he tried to get away from scandals or difficulties. But on the other hand, he had had a pontificate full of all these challenges, yet he pushed through, even despite the fact that he was constantly being, and to some extent, ridiculed by the press. But he has been really loved. And I think that's a narrative that we're seeing now as everyone is praying for him. And you see all the stories pouring in across the world to pray for him, and people who said, I converted because of him. And I know even personally, when I've met him one-on-one, he's a very gentle soul, if you will. And I think his legacy will be one of sort of this very scholarly, professor-like Pope, who really has wanted to show the love of Christ and the truth to the world. And even if many don't necessarily agree with him, people respect people who hold on to who they are to some extent and their values. So I think that's what it's about.
Quite a legacy. All right, we'll continue to follow updates on this. Claudio Lavanga and Deborah Luboff, thank you both so much. All right, turning now to the latest on Ukraine, which is dealing with another wave of Russian strikes, a barrage of missiles filed at different regions, according to Ukrainian officials. And among the cities targeted was the capital of Kyiv. That's where we find NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley. Matt, good morning to you. So what's the situation like right now where you are, and what do we know about damage or injuries there?
Yeah, well, I'm standing in one of actually a public park in the middle of a residential neighborhood. This is where kids play, and right behind me was where a lot of the debris fell. And when I say debris, I don't mean an actual missile. Now, there was, something like 69 missiles fired all across the country today. A lot of them, most of them, 54 of them were actually intercepted. So when I talk about debris, I'm talking about the missile fired by the Russians was hit by a Ukrainian anti-aircraft system. And all of that has to go somewhere. Some of it landed right here, right behind me. It's already gone. The officials came here, they picked it up, but take a look over here, Stephen. This is very much a park. Children play here. And actually, kind of ironically, if you can see this behind me, they call this Rocket Park. This is because of that shape there. But, this is a place, we talked to some people around here. There's kids here. And they were saying they were lucky that it didn't hit an actual residential building. But if you can imagine, if some of that falling debris struck here during daylight hours when kids were playing here, it would have been a nightmare for the parents. And I talked with one man, and he said, he's been taking it kind of lax when it comes to going to the bomb shelters. And now, he said this morning, he really learned his lesson now. From now on, he's going to be hustling down to the bomb shelters.
So concerning to see that playground behind you talking about all this debris. There have also been reports of explosions across the country. So do we know what's going on outside of Kyiv, and how are Ukraine's air defenses handling these strikes?
Yeah, well, the whole country was impacted. And, I got to tell you, Stephen, this is something that a lot of folks here were waiting for, the other foot to drop, because it's been quite a while, about 2 weeks, maybe more, since the last really comprehensive Russian attack nationwide. Here in Kyiv, and again, Stephen, all of this has been, for the most part, targeting electricity infrastructure. Vladimir Putin has really been quite explicit about his intentions and his targets. They want to basically turn the lights out for Ukrainians, sap their will by keeping them in the dark, quite literally. And so that's why here in Kyiv, as a result of the bombardment today, 40% of households are without electricity. In Lviv, to the east, it's something like 90%. So even though the Ukrainians have managed to shoot down a lot of these Russian missiles, they've been very devastatingly effective in turning out the lights.
So many power outages. And Matt, this attack comes after Moscow rejected President Zelensky's 10-point peace plan, which he had been promoting to different world leaders. What did that include, and do we know why the Kremlin just decided to dismiss it entirely?
Well, we know exactly why the Kremlin dismissed it, because it would essentially roll back and even push back further their goals for their special military operation. The 10-point peace plan, among other things, it was that, the Russians would surrender all of the territory that they had taken, not just now in 2020 at the beginning of the fight, but all the way back to 2014. That includes most of the Donbass region and Crimea. And then they also would be submitting themselves to essentially war crimes trials, that they would be allowing themselves to be investigated and arrested. These are this was sort of, from the Zelensky's point of view, justice, retribution, but from the Russians, kind of a pie-in-the-sky request.
Pie-in-the-sky request, peace plan, much needed, much sought after. We'll see if another one is able to hold. Matt Bradley, thanks so much. All right, newly elected Congressman George Santos is now being investigated after admitting to misrepresenting his resume while campaigning. In a statement, Nassau County District Attorney Ann Donnelly said, quote, "The 3rd District must have an honest and accountable representative in Congress," and that, quote, "no one was above the law." This move comes after the New York Times released a bombshell report on Santos in which they reported that he embellished some of his background, including details about his employment and where he went to school. Santos has apologized for embellishing his resume and said he had made mistakes, but he has not responded to specific requests for comments on these details.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.